Good afternoon. I hope everybody can hear me today. I'm Jackie Porter, the Cabinet Member for the Built Environment and Wellbeing, and this includes the local plan. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's event, which is a really important part of the local plan consultation. Because the whole consultation is being run online this time, we've extended the time for 8 weeks until midnight on Monday, the 12th of April. And this is the first one we've carried out in this format, excuse me, so I really hope it goes really smoothly today. Some of you will have been involved in Zoom meetings before and other matters, but this one's slightly different. Hold on, just going to check everything's okay. And some of you, so we're asking you to be involved in 3 different ways today. Oh, okay, I think there's a problem, hold on. Very sorry, I think there's been a technical hitch, but I think we're back on screen now. So, okay, I'm just going to mention that some of you have been involved in Zoom meetings before, but this one's slightly different. We're asking you to be involved in 3 ways today. So the first part is a short quiz. It's an opportunity for you to check your own knowledge about Winchester, and it's to set the scene of the local plan. In case you've not joined in with a Slido before, we'll have a practice question first. And there's no obligation to take part in this section. It doesn't form part of responses to the plan. It's just for your interest. The second part is a series of questions on each of the strategic issues. These will be retained as evidence towards the local plan process, so we'd really appreciate you joining in. And the third opportunity is the question section. We'd like you to answer the questions after the presentation. We'd like you to answer your questions after the presentation, I should say, but you are welcome to put up your question during the whole presentation event. Any that remain unanswered will be responded to and put up as an FAQ online following the event. To pose a question, go to the little speech bubble with a question mark at the right of your screen, and there's a section for your name and a text box will appear on the screen. And we'll remind you about this as we go through the presentation. So what's different about this refresh of the local plan? The climate crisis is the biggest challenge that we have and that we face now and in the future. We need to play our part in tackling the crisis, and this is at the centre of our local plan. I'm therefore delighted that we've been able to arrange this event where we'll share with you the information on the strategic issues and priorities document and our new local plan website, as we really want you to be part of our local plan process. We're running this event as a Teams live event, and there'll be an opportunity, if you'd like to participate, to do so via the Slido software. There'll also be an opportunity to have questions at the end of the session, as we've just mentioned, and this event's being recorded, so it will be placed on the new local plan website. If you'd like to stay anonymous, therefore, please just remove your name when you submit your question. So now I'm going to hand you over to Adrian Fox, Strategic Planning Manager at Winchester City Council, who will outline the structure of the event. Bethany, can you take over the slides, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Adrian Fox. I'm the Strategic Planning Manager at Winchester City Council, and thank you very much for all taking the time this afternoon to attend this event. So this is a really exciting opportunity to help shape the future of the district to 2038. We do really want as many people as possible to be involved in our local plan consultation that runs until the 12th of April. And we really hope that as part of this event, you'll help us spread the word about the local plan consultation. So as Councillor Porter said, we are going to do a series of interactive sessions using the Slido software, and it's purely you can choose to obviously be involved in that or obviously not as you so fit. So I'm going to talk you through the new local plan website and give you an overview of it and an overview of the key issues in the strategic priorities document. So to kick us off, we have launched a new local plan website, which is www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. We tried to make that as interesting and as informative and as easy to use as possible. It is shaped around 9 different topics or themes, which I'll go through in a minute. And we tried to basically divide it up and explain very simply in plain English, hopefully, what a local plan is and why it's important to get involved in the local plan process. Next slide, please, Beth. A key feature of the new local plan website is a mapping feature. This was something that was picked up in the government's recently announced white paper, where they wanted people to identify and find out what's happening in their local environment. So on the new website, there's a new feature where you can put your postcode in and you can see various things from listed buildings to confines, etc. And we're going to be developing this tool as part of the journey through the local plan process. But the main thing is it helps you discover what is happening in your local area. So if, in other words, if a site's been put forward or there's a listed building, things like that. So hopefully that's a new feature that you'll find useful. Next slide, please. The local plan is a journey, and we're right at the beginning part of that journey at the moment with the Strategic Issues and Priorities Consultation, which runs until the 12th of April. We need to engage and hear feedback from people as part of this journey, and then we need to shape and develop a new plan, which is called the Regulation 18 plan, and that will be towards the end part of this year, next year. We then need to take into account any comments that we have received as part of that consultation and develop another style local plan, which basically builds on the information and the knowledge that we've gained from those previous two consultations, and that's called a Regulation 19 plan. That plan is submitted to the Secretary of State, who will appoint an independent inspector to oversee an examination of the local plan. And then we will adopt the local plan, hopefully by the 2023. Next slide, please. So in terms of the actual document itself, so it's called the Strategic Issues and Priorities Consultation. It includes a previous vision from the core strategy. And the key things are that a lot has changed in the world since we produced the core strategy in terms of obviously the climate emergency that Councillor Porter outlined, and in terms of the way that we live and travel. So we are seeking views on what should be the new vision for the local plan. And that's really important because we want to know what kind of place we want to create in 2038. And I do appreciate that that's a long way to look into the distance, but that's a really important element of this consultation. The Town Forum have done some work on creating a vision for Winchester, and appreciating that it's only very much focused on Winchester, we want to identify if there's any elements that we can include in the local plan vision. At the centre of the new local plan is the carbon neutrality objectives and obviously the climate emergency. And we want to make that the forefront and the centre of all decisions that we make in the future. We've identified a number of sustainable development objectives, so under economic, environmental and social infrastructure, and we're seeking feedback on whether or not those objectives are right. We thought it's important to identify a series of objectives we can then measure to see whether or not we're achieving what we set out to achieve. Next slide, please. I'm now going to hand you over to Beth, who's going to talk you through Slido and talk you through the practice run. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Adrian. So as we've mentioned previously, Slido is an online software platform which allows you to interact with us. We will have lots of polls and a quiz to start off with, which we've said is very informal, and it just provides you with some useful background. This app does work best when used on a phone or a tablet, and if you can please watch the live event on your laptop and use Slido on a secondary device, it does make it a lot easier. Obviously it's completely optional whether you do take part, but if you have downloaded it, if you can go to the app or slido.com and type in the code 6536, and throughout the event, as I've said, we'll have some quizzes, a word cloud, some polls and rating scales to help inform you on the topics that we're going to cover, and just to provide you with that background. And it'll also provide you with a chance to have your say and inform on the local plan. So it's your opportunity to get involved with this live event and have your say about what matters to you and be able to shape the local plan. So I'm going to give everyone a few moments now to get logged on to Slido. And you can stay anonymous, so you don't have to put your name in. That's great. We've got quite a few people joining now. So I'll just give anyone else who'd like to join the last few minutes to pop their name in, and then we will start the quiz. The first question will actually be a practice question, and then we'll have 4 questions which are around the local plan and the themes that we're going to cover. Okay, that's great. So what we're going to do is get started with the practice question. So what day is it today? Is it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday or Friday? And as I've said before, this is just a test and get you used to the Slido software and how it runs. Okay, that's great. I think everybody's had a chance to answer that question. So, majority of people saying Thursday, and we've got a couple saying Tuesday and Friday, and of course the correct answer is actually Thursday. So that was just a good practice question to get you started there. So we'll move on to the first of the 4 questions in this quiz today. What percentage of carbon CO2 emissions are under local authority influence? Is it 15%, 30%, or is it 40%? So I'll give you all a few moments to put your answers in now. Okay, I think everybody's had a chance to put their answer in. So a real quite even split here. So majority of people saying 15%, and the answer is actually 40%. So local authorities in the UK have a 40% influence over the percentage of carbon emissions. Okay, moving on to the second question. What percentage of people are predicted to be over 65 in the Winchester district by 2038? Is it 28.2%? Is it 12.5%? Is it 23.4%? Or is it 17.6%? And I'll give everyone a few moments to put their answers in now. Brilliant. Okay, so everyone's had a chance to answer that one. So majority of going with the highest percentage of 28.2, and that would be correct. So it'd be 28% of people are going to be predicted to be over 65 within our district. The third question, how many homes are required to be built in the Winchester district per year? Is it 1024? Is it 400, 700 or 550? So if you can get your answers in now. Okay, great. I think everyone's had a chance to answer that one. So majority going with 700 homes to be built each year, and that is indeed the correct answer. So every year 700 homes in our district needs to be built. So just the last question in this quiz. How many listed buildings are there currently in the Winchester district? Is it 2,267, 1,386, 2,038 or 3,791? Okay, so the majority are saying 2,267, but we've also got quite an even split saying just over 2,000 and just under 4,000, and the correct answer is indeed 2,267 listed buildings. So I'll now hand back to Adrian for the 9 key issues that the local plan will focus on.
Thank you, Beth. Hopefully that's a nice way just to get you familiar with the Slido software. I appreciate that obviously for some of you it's a new piece of software we've just got to get used to. So hopefully when we use it again in the later part of the kind of presentation, you're at least familiar how it uses. So in terms of the 9 key issues, as I said, the climate emergency is at the heart of obviously the new local plan. But we have included a new topic on carbon neutrality because we do feel that it's so important to the delivery of the local plan. We've got topics on biodiversity and natural environment, conserving and enhancing the historic environment, homes for all, the vibrant economy, promoting sustainable transport, living well, low carbon infrastructure and ensuring the delivery and the success of the local plan. And I'll be going through those in detail, but they will be interjected with various Slido events. Next slide, please, Beth. So over to you, please, Beth.
Thank you, Adrian. So as Adrian just mentioned, the 9 key issues that we'll be focusing on in the local plan. We just want to ask you what are the most important priorities to you in the new local plan, and you can pick up to 3 here. So is it carbon neutrality? Is it biodiversity and the natural environment? Is it conserving and enhancing historic environment? Is it homes for all? Creating a vibrant economy? Promoting sustainable travel? Living well, low carbon infrastructure and local plan viability, or is it the delivery and success of the local plan? So you can pick up to 3 here. I'll give everybody a moment to pick their most important priorities now. Okay, so the majority of people saying that homes for all is the most important priority to them, carbon neutrality in second, and promoting sustainable transport and active travel in third. That's great. Thank you everyone for participating. I'll hand back to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. As mentioned, carbon neutrality is a specific topic in the new local plan. And the government is obviously committed to the UK becoming net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But clearly, our city council has set a more ambitious target of obviously the aim to be carbon neutral council by 2030. But the local plan is only one of the tools that will help support the reduction in carbon emissions. Clearly, it's a very important tool, but it is important to note that it is one of the tools. So what we're doing is we're proposing that we should have a strategic policy on climate change, and we welcome feedback as part of the local plan consultation on what should be included in that strategic overarching policy. But also, we feel that it's so important that we should have a number of local policies which would assist the council moving towards carbon neutrality. And in the strategic issues and priorities document, we've identified a number of possible areas, but we would be very keen to hear feedback on that. Next slide, please, Beth. So in terms of biodiversity in the natural environment, we are asking views as part of this consultation on biodiversity net gain. This is a new requirement that the government's introducing about wildlife and the net gain that we should obviously have. We are seeking views on the allocation of land for open space, biodiversity, and to provide off-site mitigation on a number of effects to mitigate the effects of new development. We have put forward and we are seeking feedback on a number of approaches to countryside protection, and we have had a number of organisations and parish councils write to us about the possibility of a green belt. So we feel that it is important to ask a question on whether or not there is a need for a green belt. Next slide, please, Beth. Thank you, Beth. If you could talk us through.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. So this is a word cloud polling system. So what do you think are the most important things the local plan can do to reduce carbon emissions? And you're not limited to how many answers you can submit here. And the idea with this word cloud is that the more times a word is mentioned and submitted, that word will then grow. So it shows that importance to people if we've got the reoccurring answers here. So I'll give everyone a few moments now to submit their answers. Okay, so some really good answers coming through here. We can see that transport is very important to the majority of people. Also greener buildings, cycleways, building qualities. Some great answers coming through now. So lots of reducing traffic, safer walking and cycling routes, public transport, electric vehicles, solar energy, lots of renewables on here, reusing buildings. That's great. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. This will be available after our event too, so that we can use these to help inform the local plan. I think everybody's had a chance now to submit their answers, so I'll hand back to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. Next slide, please. One of the topics in the strategic issues and priorities document is recognising that we've got a great wealth in the district of historic buildings, and we are seeking views on whether or not the existing heritage policies in the local plan are adequate. In other words, are they working successfully as we want them to work, or are there rooms for improvements? And we also want to know, how can the local plan support energy efficiency improvements to listed buildings whilst preventing their harm to their historic features? So we are very keen to learn, because obviously they're a great asset, but obviously they've got a particular fabric that you need to make sure that you don't destroy, and obviously we protect it for future generations. Next slide, please. Thanks, Beth, over to you.
Okay, so this is a rating scale. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how successful have the council been in balancing protecting the countryside with the need for development? So 1 being the least successful and 10 being the most successful. And I'll give everyone a few moments now to submit their answers. Okay, so a real variety of answers here on the scale. So at the moment we're looking at an average score of 5.4. That's great. Thank you everyone for participating. I'll hand back over to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. Well, I think it became very clear in the word cloud poll that we did recently that homes for all is a very important subject. We have in the strategic issues and priorities document identified 4 alternative ways of distributing the housing need across the district. So we could continue with the current approach of distributing development to sustainable hierarchy of settlements. So in other words, the way that we've distributed it in the past with the existing local plan. We could focus a larger proportion of development on Winchester and other larger, more sustainable settlements. An alternative is we could look at 1 or completely new strategic allocations or new settlements to accommodate our growth. Or we could distribute development around the district largely in proportion to the existing settlements. And we are seeking feedback on those 4 different growth options as part of the strategic issues and options document. That will help shape where we allocate sites in the future to deliver that strategy that obviously we are seeking comments on. Thank you. Next slide, please. We've got the topic on which we called a vibrant economy. We're all very aware of the devastating effects of COVID-19, and we are very keen to hear feedback and views on how we can enhance the vitality and viability of our town centres. And we want to know how the local plan can do this in a positive way and what types of economic development we should consider. What is the future role of town centres and the uses within them, which is clearly changing as a result of COVID. And more importantly, what are the rural opportunities to obviously enable people to access local facilities locally rather than travel? How does the local plan support home working, which we're all obviously doing at the moment? And how can the local plan support the development of the green economy and the carbon neutrality? And they are all key issues that we feel that would be really helpful to have feedback on. Next slide, please. So I'll hand back to Beth, who's going to give you a quick kind of quiz. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So we're quite interested to know how COVID has changed those housing needs, and this is tick all that apply to you. So this is another polling question. So is it need for flexible spaces? Is it bigger gardens? Being close to outdoor facilities is more or less important? Is being close to shops more or less important? And outdoor facilities, is that more or less important to be close to them? And also transport links, is that more or less important to you now? Okay, so I think almost everyone's had a chance to submit their answers. So most people saying that being close to outdoor facilities is more important, and the need for flexible spaces is very important to them now. Being closer to the shops is quite important too, bigger gardens. That's great. I think everyone's had a chance to submit that now. So I'll hand back to Adrian.
Thank you, Beth. So a clear way that we can support our aim to move towards a carbon neutrality in the district by 2030 is to promote sustainable transport. So as part of the consultation, we are seeking views back on whether or not our existing policies are ambitious enough or whether or not there is need for improvements. And in other words, what's actually changed since we prepared the core strategy a number of years ago. And clearly transport is changing with the more introduction of obviously electric cars, e-bikes and things like that. And linked to that is whether the development should be concentrated in locations that already have cycling and walking and public transport opportunities to enhance obviously the accessibility of that. We have got park and ride facilities in the city, but whether or not we need additional park and ride facilities and in what part of the city centre do we need those, and we are keen to get feedback on that as part of this consultation. Next slide, please. Over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So this is our last Slido interactive question. So what would you like to see more of in towns and high streets across the district in the future? And again, this is a word cloud. We had a great word cloud last time, so if you can submit as many answers, I'll give you a few moments now to do that. And again, it will increase in size if more people write the same word or phrase. Okay, some great answers coming through. So top 3 are open spaces, pop-up shops, more entertainment facilities. Green spaces is definitely the most popular here. So we've got large areas for exercise, multi-use spaces, some more markets, street entertainment, cycle routes, creative art spaces, free electric charging, cafes, park and ride in the north. Some really great answers here, everyone. More nature, it looks like, cafes, regeneration, housing, more outdoor eating and seating areas. That's great, lots of them coming through now. Okay. I think everybody's had a chance to submit their answers now. That's brilliant. Thank you for all those answers, everyone. I'll hand back over to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. Linked to obviously all the really positive answers that we've just received, we've got a topic on living well. We do think that's very important, and it's probably at the forefront of many people's minds now as a result of COVID, and it is access to open space in order to promote obviously health and well-being and to reduce inequality. We do want to create strong and connected communities and neighbourhoods to obviously promote people's health and well-being. One of the ideas that came from the work that the Town Forum did was the 15-minute neighbourhood concept, and we are keen to receive feedback on how that might be developed in the new local plan. The idea is that within 15 minutes you've got access to the services and facilities that you need, which obviously then means that you don't need to travel or drive anywhere. So the living well topic is a very topical topic, and we are seeking feedback on that. Next slide, please. Linked to the council's target to obviously become carbon neutral is low carbon infrastructure and local plan viability. So we are seeking views on a number of possible strategic approaches towards low carbon infrastructure, such as supporting proposals for renewable energy and low carbon infrastructure, and I'll come on to the call for sites in a minute. Supporting proposals for domestic battery storage to be built with low carbon infrastructure. So in other words, you capture the energy supply where you actually gain it from. We're also undertaking a call for sites for renewable sites, because we do think that that is extremely important in terms of us moving towards a carbon neutral district and boosting obviously the renewable energy rates in the district. Next slide, please. Enabling the delivery and success of the local plan. A key part of making sure that we are achieving what we set out to achieve is making sure that we have a strong and robust monitoring framework right at the start of the local plan process. So we are seeking views on what is a successful monitoring framework, what does it look like? And more importantly, how do we monitor to make sure that we're on track to obviously achieve net zero carbon by 2030? So we are seeking that. And it's very important that the monitoring framework is built in at the very front end of the process rather than at the tail end. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are, alongside the strategic issues and priorities documents, we are doing a call for sites. That will include housing and employment sites. It will include brownfield sites, and it will call renewable energy sites, and carbon offsetting sites and nitrate sites and green infrastructure. Apologies, on my screen the actual bullet points are upside down, but I'm not sure if that's the same for everybody, so apologies for that. Next slide, please. So how can you respond to the strategic issues and priorities consultation? Well, please go to the new website, and there is a button on the top right that says have your say, and the consultation's open to the 12th of April. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk you through the Have Your Say section. So within the Have Your Say section, you can receive email alerts for the local plan updates. There's a link to the Citizen Space consultation, which is where all the consultation questions are held. But also we appreciate that people are busy, particularly with obviously the things that are happening at this moment. So there is a series of short polls that people can just participate and give us feedback. And clearly this event is one of those mechanisms as well that we're seeking feedback from. Next slide, please. In terms of the actual engagement strategy, we are doing posts on social media in terms of obviously Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are running radio adverts on Wave Radio to announce it, because we appreciate people are obviously at home listening to the radio. We've got a variety of posters around the districts. We've sent out over 200 posters to parish councils, to supermarkets, to communities, to hospitals and GP premises. We are running newspaper advertisements to help spread the message, and we are appreciating that people are exercising and going for walks more often, so we are doing bus stop advertising to obviously raise the awareness of this. Clearly this virtual event is one of the ways that we're engaging with people, and we're obviously publicising it on the council website, but we do need your help to help raise awareness of this consultation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand back to Councillor Porter now for any questions, and happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your time. So if anybody has any questions, if you can put those in the chat function to the right hand side of your screen, and then we can obviously answer those either individually, or I can call on members of my team. Thank you very much.
Oops. Okay, so we haven't got any questions yet, so hopefully some will be coming in soon. While we're waiting for some questions, Adrian, I just wanted to raise about affordable housing. Would you like to explain about how we're asking about affordable housing in the local plan, please?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. That's a key part of the topic Homes for All, in terms of obviously how we deliver affordable housing. The government is very clear on its definition of affordable housing, and that's contained in what the government's called the National Planning Policy Framework, and that includes everything from starter homes to homes for obviously other people as well. We are very keen at the moment. Obviously, we've got a requirement in the local plan for a percentage for large sites to deliver affordable homes, and that needs to be revisited and re-looked at in light of obviously the emerging evidence. But we are very keen that obviously we do provide a level of affordable housing to meet the need. Thank you very much.
Still haven't got any questions as far as I can see, but just tying up with that, one of the risks, of course, is that we've previously been allocating affordable homes within quite small sites, and the government's just changed the way in which we set those criteria. Do you just want to elaborate on that a little bit so that the public understand that challenge?
Sorry, Councillor Porter, could you just repeat that again?
Well, up to now, we've always allocated affordable homes within sites of as small as 10 or 12 or 14 dwellings, but that's now changing with the government criteria. Do you want to explain how that's happening?
So the government has changed the threshold for affordable housing. We were able to ask for affordable housing on sites less than 10 dwellings, but now unfortunately we can't, because the government has said that the threshold is 10 dwellings. And like I say, we will be reviewing the threshold for how much affordable housing we need to deliver as part of obviously the local plan review. So there will be a percentage in affordable housing policy that we will set. And obviously if a development is over a certain size, we will be asking for a percentage of affordable housing, but that threshold needs to be determined and set as part of the local plan viability.
Thank you. Somebody's asked, wouldn't the number of people on your council house waiting list, oh, the question's just disappeared. Hold on, let's see if I can look just through the published ones. That's it. So the question, how many people do you have on your waiting list for council or social housing? Do we know that question, that number exactly? I'm
afraid I don't have that question, answer that question to hand. the key thing is that the number of homes that we need to deliver, the just under 700 houses a year, is determined by central government standard methodology, and that will include obviously people in terms of their predicted need for the district, in terms of how many people are obviously ageing in the community, and the affordability ratio. So there's two determining factors that go into determining our housing figure, and like I say, we would take that into account as part of obviously development of the local plan. It currently stands at 700 dwellings a year.
Thank you. And somebody else has written, what's the actual time, Sharon has written, what's the actual time frame for the plan to be developed? When will it be agreed?
So the government is very clear that they want every local authority to have a new local plan adopted or significantly in place by 2023. And that's certainly the timetable we're working towards. Obviously, there is some unknowns with that, in terms of obviously the government has consulted on the white paper and changes to the planning system. So we have to work around that. But obviously we are aiming to get the plan, if not adopted, substantially complete by 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next one is, how does the local plan influence something like the Royal Down development proposal or Mitchell Devon Newtown? Does Adrian want to answer that, or does Simon want to answer that? Adrian, shall I bring it back to you?
I'm happy to do that. Councillor Porter.
Okay. Simon Finch, Director.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Yeah, just to say that the most important thing, and we understand why that would be a question, because it's clearly something which is of considerable interest to many local people, and I can tell you officers and councillors as well, is because there's been a lot of attention on that particular site that's been put forward by the promoter. Just to stress what this is about, a strategic issues and option priorities paper, is not about allocating any individual sites for development at all. So that's got to be very, very clear. We have tried to explain that as best as we can. But what you did get a question on in the strategic issues and priorities paper, and on this event today, if you can remember a bit earlier in the event, was about a development strategy, and we had 4 options outlined there, and there may be others which people will feed back to us through the consultation process, which we'd like to hear. And really, whatever you end up doing, whatever that ultimately ends up being included within our new local plan, will be partly determined, of course, by the numbers you've got to accommodate over the period of time of the plan. And that's always the case. That's been the case in the past, and it's the case elsewhere in Hampshire and beyond, with all the districts making those local plans. So it will depend how you approach that. The amount of development largely or influences the type of strategy that you're going to have to follow. And those are the 4 options, and there may be others that we outlined earlier in the presentation today. So at the moment, you know, it's not a case of identifying or setting sites, because that's part of the process that follows on. And as my colleague Mr. Fox has explained at the beginning of the presentation, it is a bit of a journey. I don't like that word, but it gets used a lot, doesn't it, on all sorts of in all sorts of contexts. But it is a journey, and we follow that process, and that's really important with planning. We've got to follow a process, and the reason we do that is to be fair and equitable to everybody. That's landowners, members of the public, businesses, and everybody else. So at the moment, we're only considering the options that we could have to accommodate the number of new homes that we would need to have. And as I think the majority of people identified quite rightly earlier in the event, was that's about 700 a year currently. So unless the government changes that, that's the number that we'll be planning to accommodate up until 2038. So we need to develop what the strategy is, and that's partly based on the numbers that we've got to accommodate. At the moment, there are no sites which we're seeking to allocate as part of this consultation process. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And I think the important point about the local plan is that responses from the public to the local plan do influence the decision about how the local plan forms. And so it's really important, if you have a view on that, to make sure you submit it and against those options which we've offered into the paper. Caroline Dibden's asking, is it possible to add railway lines and stations to the interactive map? I would think it's highly possible. Mr. Fox, do you want to answer that? I think it's very relevant actually, because we're talking about transport nodes and being close.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, I agree. The interactive map we are going to be adding to throughout, obviously, the next couple of years. It was set up on the new website to test it out to make sure it works. And my idea is to basically populate that with some more layers. And clearly, as the person has pointed out, railway lines in terms of accessibilities is clearly a key part of obviously moving towards climate neutrality. So yes, we can certainly investigate that and see what other layers, and we would be interested as part of this consultation to hear what other layers people think would be useful to add on to the interactive map. Thank you.
It's a very important point, and really appreciate that question. And actually, I think we should be adding major bus routes on as well, actually, because they're also important for transport nodes. Thank you. Lots more questions, so I'll just whiz through them. Trying to check that there's no other ones that are just the same. Okay, so how accessible is this consultation for those without access to IT? Obviously, this question, I can answer this. If anybody wants to have a set of papers, they can do so if they haven't got access to IT. And actually the advertisement's gone out in things like parish magazines, and it's going out in the press, and it has a phone number to call. It's a dedicated number for the phone for the planning department, so they can talk through someone's requirements. They are also available at libraries, but actually most libraries are closed at the moment. But if you have got access to, or don't have access to IT at home, but you can use a computer, you can also go into libraries to deal with that. Right, the next question is, will the aim of carbon neutrality be accepted by the government inspector? Simon, do you want to answer that one? I believe they would have to, and in fact, on a recent planning piece of work we've been doing, the government inspectors asked our view of the current carbon neutrality situation. Simon, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I'll do a fairly sort of strategic answer without trying to get too much into the detail. But I think basically one of the context of the new plan that we're developing has got to be national policy. So what we have to follow or have regard to is that national framework. And in actual fact, there is a consultation currently ongoing where the government is seeking to change or modify slightly its own policy, and there is mentioned there some minor changes around sustainability. But what we have to do with anything in the local plan, whether it's carbon neutrality or any other ambition or target that we want to set, is be able to back that up with evidence, because the one thing, the really big thing that the government inspector is going to be looking at when we get to the point of having a draft local plan, which Adrian explained earlier in the meeting, was what's called, it's a horrible term, Regulation 19. What that basically means is that's the draft local plan, the advanced draft. You want that inspector to consider, and then they produce a report which is essentially sort of binding on the council if he or she considers that there are bits within that local plan that need modification, and they would then produce that in a report. So it's really up to us, taking into consideration all the government guidance, all the other planning policy that's out there, and then putting that and formulating that into a policy that's then tested by the inspector. But the most important thing with any policy that we've got is we're able to back it up basically with a good sound evidence base. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And the next one is, how does the local plan shape your thinking about shared ownership and other schemes to support younger people with little capital to make progress towards their own home? I'm going to let Adrian come in on that one, but I'd just like to say that that is one thing where we have to make sure that in the way in which we plan development, it has that opportunity to set up homes that are either discounted market sale or shared ownership or for rent. Adrian, do you want to make a comment on that one?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yes, a very topical and very important subject. As I mentioned, the government's definition of affordable housing includes a whole range of affordable housing. That's ranging from affordable for rent, starter homes, discounted market sales for homes, and other forms of home ownership, and that includes shared ownership, which obviously is at a discounted level of 20% of the market. The government is very clear that we should provide a blend of housing according to that definition. So as part of the local plan process, our affordable housing policy will look somewhat different to what it is at the moment in the current local plan, but it is a very important issue to us, and we do take it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next one is how many responses do you need to make a meaningful consultation process? There are currently 56,302 premises, homes in Winchester district. How many do you think would be reasonable, Mr. Fox?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. We haven't set a kind of target or a maximum or minimum. What we're trying to do is reach out to as many people as possible. And we do appreciate that obviously we're doing this particular consultation in obviously a lockdown period. But I haven't set a target. All we're doing is obviously we're keen to gain from this consultation period and the feedback that we receive about what has worked well, what hasn't worked so well in terms of our approach, so that next time when we go out to consultation, and there will be further 2 rounds of consultation, we can help to develop that and engage with more people. And obviously at the moment we appreciate, because we're in lockdown, we are trying our utmost hardest to reach out to as many people as we can, but I've not set a target. I don't think that's right to set a target. We are basically reaching out to as many people as we can, and we're getting feedback about how successful our consultation techniques are, so that next time we can improve on those. And I'd welcome any suggestions about how we can improve on it, ready for obviously the next 2 rounds of public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're particularly keen to try and make sure we get people young and old from all different backgrounds, and also from right across the district. I think that's something we're going to be going out to our local councillors to make sure that we can really support them in their local communities to get that response. The next question is, how is the call for green sites being progressed and when? Adrian, would you like to answer that one?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, it's a very important part of our approach to the local plan consultation is to do the call for sites. That call for sites is running in parallel with the consultation for the strategic issues and priorities document. So at the moment there are on our Winchester District Council website various forms that we're encouraging people to fill in to obviously give us as much information as possible in terms of why a site could be suitable for obviously green use, such as renewable energy, and that consultation and that call for sites will run till the 12th of April. And we do think that's really important because it tends to get focused on housing. And as I mentioned, carbon neutrality is at the heart of the new local plan. So it is really important that we do a call for sites that includes green sites. So that is open till the 12th of April. Thank you.
And as we've pointed out before, if you have a good idea for a greenfield, a brownfield site or renewable energy site, then certainly it's worth raising it in your response. There are lots of boxes for open responses in the local plan response paper as well. It's not just a series of yes and no's and ticks. It really is giving you the opportunity to write in something as well. So the next question is, what is the identified need for employment sites in the district? Who would like to answer that one?
I'm quite happy to have a go.
Yes,
it's fine.
Yes,
yes, Joan Ashton won the planning team. We did have an employment needs study, which has looked at what the sort of traditional employment types of land would be required, and found that there wasn't need for any large allocations or a large demand over and above what the existing plan was providing. On the other hand, it wasn't felt that we were providing too much, given that if the current quantities that we were already planning for were built out, that would be sufficient. What it did show was that we might need to be look more carefully at the types of employment premises that are being offered. There was demand in the south of the district, for example, around the M27 corridor near Whiteley, and we needed to make sure that the type of accommodation being offered was fulfilling demands of employers. There is some need in the market town, but they didn't consider at that time that it was sufficient enough to necessarily allocate particular sites. but we would consider applications as and when they came in. There was an identified need for additional office space around Winchester town, and we have been seeking somewhere to accommodate such need, and obviously that's a question that you can answer. However, it should be said that this study, which is available if you want to know the actual quantities that were specified in the report is available on our website, the council website, as part of our evidence base, so you can read it there. But obviously this was prepared about 2 years or so ago, and definitely pre the current pandemic situation, where obviously current employment patterns and demands have changed considerably, and it remains to be seen whether that will continue. So that was what the employment study showed at the time, but it's obviously something that I think we will need to be considering again throughout the course of the development of the plan.
Yes, thank you, Joan. We of course saw the paper, then the pandemic started. Well, we thought it was only for a few weeks. We had it updated thinking it was a temporary situation, and then realised it wasn't. In fact, Winchester City Council's economy department, excuse me, in line with the planning department, have actually commissioned a new study, and I hope that this was the last lockdown, and we will know a little bit more. But I think we've all learnt a lot about what we need to run a society, and what advantages this has actually taught us as well. So it will change our employment sites, but also just to put this in context, there's also a minerals and waste plan going on at the moment, and that's also looking at employment sites for managing waste and recycling. So the next question is, how does the council want to new developments to deliver carbon neutrality? How does the council want new developments to deliver carbon neutrality? Is this for Mr. Fox?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I think it's important to stress that carbon neutrality filters across the whole of the new local plan, across all of the topics, the 9 topics that I've outlined. It does feature and needs to be addressed, because clearly it affects living well to obviously homes for all. We have, like I said, included a specific topic on carbon neutrality, and included within the strategic issues and priorities document a number of ideas that we are seeking feedback on. But it does go to the heart of the actual new local plan, and hence why I mentioned that we are seeking views on whether or not we think that it would be appropriate to include an overarching strategic policy on carbon neutrality, as well as obviously a specific topic, and as well as obviously including it in a number of other topics as well. But it must filter and be the kind of thread that goes through all of the topics in the local plan itself. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, how does this consultation reach a broad demographic sample of Winchester residents? I think we've covered that broadly, but at the same time, this sort of thing is being recorded, and it's going out to parishes and to the town as well. The town's already done some quite extensive work with their Vision 2030. So from the parish's point of view, we've met with parish councils, and we've also, as I say, advertised it, and we're going to have this as a series of FAQs on the screen as well for the future. So if people want to look at those FAQs, they can do. We've reached educational establishments, young people. We've got particular groups on neutrality, carbon neutrality, living well and vibrant economy, and we're going to carry out specific groups with community groups, etc., so that we get a really broad range of demographic if we can. And we're really aiming to get everybody from 16 to 106 if we can. So the next question, against which criteria will the Secretary of State evaluate our local plan? And if it's not approved, can it be challenged? There's a challenging question. Mr. Finch, would you like to answer that one?
Thank you, Councillor. I'd love to answer that question. Thank you for passing.
I thought you'd like that one.
Yeah, I mean,
good question though. Good question.
It is a good question, and it's one that we have to ask ourselves actually. So it is a good question. I mean, basically, I sort of touched on this a bit earlier when we were talking about development strategies and numbers of houses and things like that. Really, what you're looking for is to be able to explain and justify through the inquiry process the draft local plan that you put forward, bearing in mind you're going to have people participating quite rightly in that process, that either will agree or disagree or support or not support what the council has put into its Regulation 19 plan, which is its final draft. Bearing in mind, we will have done this consultation, we'll have done the Regulation 18 consultation, which is effectively the first draft, where it does allocate sites and has policies within it. And then you go on to the Regulation 19, which is sort of honing it down for consideration by the inspector. The inspector's looking really to make sure that that plan is reasonable and sound, and they will listen to anybody that wants to make representations at the local plan inquiry, whether it's written or in person or whatever, and they'll also be assessing it against government planning policy, practice notes and guidance. So it's a combination of those factors, and as a result of which, but by the time we get to that advanced stage, we would be confident that we can explain and justify the policies and strategy that's within that local plan, as we did last time. The second part of the question is a good one. And for those of you that are familiar or have been involved in planning in Winchester for a while, a number of years, can local plans be challenged? Yes, they can. Before they're actually sort of statutorily adopted, and Adrian will correct me if I get any of the niceties or the detail of this wrong, there is provision to challenge it after the inspector's report and before we can formally adopt it. And I think I'm right in saying that we did get a challenge last time, which was unsuccessful, so the plan was actually adopted. So it can be challenged, but only on for certain reasons. You can't challenge a local plan like you can't challenge a planning permission that's given because you don't agree or don't like the decision. It's got to be flawed. There's got to be something legally wrong with it, process, evidence, whatever, and there's got to be a basis to challenge the plan. You can't challenge it just because the council didn't go for the option that you would have preferred as a landowner or as another interest, unless there is something that's flawed or questionably flawed about the way that was delivered. So I think that's probably covered it, and I'm sure if Mr. Fox wants to add anything to it, then he will do. But that's my understanding. Thank you, Councillor Fox.
I think in the interest of time, Mr. Mitchell, we'll just carry on. But there's another question here about Greenbelt, but I'm just going to go back to Bridget Taylor, who just wants to talk about the wanting new developments to deliver carbon neutrality, and I think she'd like to speak to you about that. And then the next question after that will follow is how and when will you decide on a green belt? So Bridget first, please.
Hello, I'm Bridget Taylor. I'm one of the planners in the planning team. Just to add to the question about how we would like developments to include carbon neutrality. So Adrian talked about the idea of a strategic policy, and I just wanted to point you to, in the strategic issues and priorities document, there's a number of bullet points, and they're detailed on the website also, but the types of things that we have suggested as possible ideas. So there's using carbon opportunity mapping and money from an offsetting fund to support energy efficiency improvements where needed. The possibility of creating climate intervention areas to target areas that need improvements. We could introduce a policy that could potentially have a higher requirement than that which is required under the building regulations in terms of energy efficiency. We could include a requirement that developers consider the whole life carbon footprint of a building when they're proposing new developments, and other things around assessment of overheating and then sustainable drainage, water runoff and so on, and water efficiency measures. So there's some quite specific things that have been identified as possible measures that we would like your views on.
Thank you very much, Bridget. That's really helpful. Simon, would you want to follow on with when and how will you decide on a green belt?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, I mean, this is a really a strategic issue, and it's something which therefore is quite rightly within the strategic issue and priorities paper that we're asking for your views on. And there are specific questions and sections around protection and green belt, etc. And the reason that's in there, and it's come up today, is because there has been some discussion locally, not just within Winchester, but more broadly, around the sort of southern half of Hampshire. And for those that you're familiar, there is a group of authorities along the Solent called the Partnership for South Hampshire, of which Winchester is a member, because our southern parishes of course fall within that area. And there are a number of local authorities, as I say, in that Solent area that are members of that, and there's going to be some work done on that matter to see about that. What I would say is, and we're obviously going into this with an open book and an open mind, is that it is a strategic allocation. They're often not just focused around one settlement or one district, and in the context of the Solent area, the discussion has been over a much broader area, and some of you may have seen the CPRE paper that put forward a case for having a green belt, which included Winchester district, but was much more extensive than that. The one really sort of key matter for this is to consider that proposal against national policy and the government's aspirations, and it's quite a high bar in the national planning policy framework when it talks about the reasons for designating a green belt. I mean, fundamentally, they're there to stop urban sprawl and to keep land permanently open effectively, and they're a longer term measure. They're not something you put in one local plan and then take out the next. And as a result of which, I don't think the government is envisaging a whole wave of new green belts. So, however, you know, the policy is there, so it can be considered. Without getting too much into the technicalities, we'd have to, if we were going to do that through the local plan, we'd need to be able to really show you know, a good strong argument, a compelling argument as to why we were able to meet the high bar that the government guidance sets. And as I said before, in my personal view, it's a broader issue. As the CPRE has said, you know, it's not just simply about Winchester. And of course, it's not always simply about colouring the area around all of your settlements, whether you're in Eastleigh, Fareham, Winchester or wherever, completely sort of greenwashing them and saying that, because what you've got to do is to look over a longer period if you're going to go through those designations, and it may be that you'd have to safeguard some land in the interim for development rather than making it all green belt. So it's quite a complicated issue, and it's something which we need to give serious consideration to, and that's why it's in the strategic issues and priorities paper, and we would certainly welcome people's views on that and why they feel the current local plan policies, local gaps, etc., are not sufficient and are not working, because the government will probably expect us to be able to answer that question too. So it's quite a broad subject, quite an interesting subject, but basically you'd have to allocate it through the local plan and see whether the government inspector agreed with it. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've got the next one, which I'm not quite sure who I'm going to ask to do this. Maybe Steve Erpachek, if he's on the line. How much do budgets impact the final agreed plan? i.e. electric public transport system would be ideal, but how would that be funded, or is that something that comes after? And I think we have to remember we are a planning authority, but we don't have authority over things like transport. But I wondered if any of the team would like to respond to that specifically.
I can
yes, Adrian.
Assist if it's helpful, Councillor Porter. A key part of preparing a sound local plan, and that's the government words, is proving that the plan is deliverable. And as part of the preparation of the local plan, we have to produce what's called a local plan viability assessment. In other words, to demonstrate that everything that we've included in the local plan, in terms of all the policies and all the things that we want, are actually deliverable. Because clearly there is a point where obviously the plan is undeliverable, and that will be a key test of soundness at the local plan examination. As Councillor Porter mentioned, we don't, as a city council, obviously deliver bus transport. That's done by Stagecoach, but clearly electric buses are an important part of obviously moving towards the carbon neutrality effect. And obviously some cities such as Oxford and Cambridge have been successful in securing government funding for electric buses, etc. So obviously we will clearly look out for obviously what funding opportunities there are around, and obviously be supportive of that. But obviously we've got to bear in mind that the local plan has got to be deliverable, and a key part of that deliverability is the actual cost of the infrastructure, which we will be looking at in the infrastructure delivery statement. Thank you.
And of course, it's key in our particular area that we work really closely with Hampshire County Council, who also commission services. But it's not just, I can appreciate Sharon's question wasn't just purely about transport, it's about actually making it deliverable. And I think the point you've raised about funding is very valid, but we have to show that the plan that we make is deliverable and financial. So we've had two conflicting views here. One's going, most people are finding this consultation difficult to complete. Will a planning inspector take this into account? And one's saying not a problem. So I think that shows the two varying issues relating to filling in forms. The local plan is never an easy document to fill in. The great advantage of it in this particular setup is that you can fill in part of it on citizen space. So if you start on you're putting in your contact details, you can fill in a section, you get a feedback email so that you can go back to it again and do another section. The questions themselves are quite simple. They're not particularly complicated. They're certainly not set out to trap you, and there are always open sections as well so that you can answer those if you wish. It's not one of those that you can't answer the next question if you haven't answered the previous one. So really we do want people to complete those, and as Bridget Taylor has written, that if you have any problem you just email planningpolicy@winchester.gov.uk or call and someone will help you through the process. I'm going to go on to the next one. How do you achieve the right balance between the needs of urban centres, historic villages and rural communities? There's a challenge. Who would like to answer that one? Would that be a Bridget or Adrian? Adrian, there you are.
If I could perhaps start, Councillor Porter.
Yeah.
Very important question about how we achieve the right balance. And it actually goes to the heart of obviously the 4 different growth options that we're actually consulting on in terms of obviously where we should plan that new development. Should it be focused on the kind of urban area or the rural area? And that's what we're asking for feedback on. But clearly we want to support obviously the rural area in terms of making sure there is housing available for obviously a broad range of people, including younger people. And clearly, obviously, in terms of the urban area, making the best use of facilities and services. So I would encourage people to think about the growth options that are in the Homes for All chapter, about how you respond, because clearly it is an issue, getting that balance right. And that's why exactly we're seeking feedback on those growth options to make sure we've got that consensus and that view on how we should obviously divide up future housing in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. One question I missed much earlier on, and we've just got 2 more questions before we finish. And this one was, wouldn't the number of people on your waiting list for council houses determine the number of houses that need to be built? Perhaps you'd like to decide to just explain briefly how the number of houses that are determined to be built are calculated, Adrian? That would be helpful. So why we get to the number of 700, that's the question, or 692. I think that's the question. But just related as well to the people on the waiting list.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. So, like I say, the government now determines through what they call a standard methodology the number of houses that we are required to build, and that is the figure just below 700 dwellings per year. That is used from nationally available information about the affordability ratio in terms of obviously how affordable houses are, in terms of obviously people's wage incomes, and a number of other factors, and the government reviews that figure every year and every other year. So that figure obviously can move, and it has moved. Those of you who are on the call will remember that just before Christmas, the government changed the standard methodology and sought to increase our figure to 1,024. They've now reverted back to the figure of just under 700 dwellings a year for our housing target. But like I say, they take into account national figures, and that's how they come up with it. And they're very clear that obviously that is the figure that local authorities need to provide. Thank you.
And we've had it confirmed that includes the area that's in the South Downs National Park. But of course, the South Downs National Park has a much lower requirement, so we won't be expecting them to take a lot of those houses. But the number on our housing list is obviously very important, and so we need to make sure that as many of those are affordable that we possibly can, and the council has a programme to continue to build council houses as well as to get affordable homes from housing providers. So the last question really how will you convert existing houses so that they reduce their energy use and achieve a zero carbon footprint? And bearing in mind, as I said, we've got 56,302 homes, and this plan from 2031 to 2038 is only expecting to deliver just under 2,700. So the question is, how do you convert the existing houses so that they reduce their energy use and achieve a zero carbon footprint? Mr. Finch, I think this comes under your area as well, does it not?
Yeah, I think in terms of thank you, Councillor, sort of generality of it, I think the one thing we've got to remember is, and we've declared a climate emergency, there's as you know, we've got targets in there both for the council and for the district, etc., etc. So I think most people on the meeting here have demonstrated through the questions that have asked they're familiar with at least the principles of what we're trying to achieve. Now, the local plan is part of the tools. It's one in the tool in the toolbox, and it's an important one, which is why it's a central feature of this consultation, because it needs to be a central feature of the plan. But what we have to also bear in mind, of course, is what's the purpose of a local plan? It's to help us set the direction for new development, and then for planning applications that roll in after that to be determined against the local plan, which is how it shapes the development over the next 15 plus years. What it can't do is it doesn't necessarily go back retrospectively. So in terms of how you would deal with the existing housing stock, which is clearly an issue, is not necessarily something the local plan gets the opportunity to deal with, because unless you need planning permission at some point to do something, then the local plan doesn't come into play into your property, if you see what I mean. However, what we can do is, as Councillor Porter's mentioned briefly earlier, we're a big provider of housing ourselves. I think it's 5,500 homes, so we can do that through our sort of housing arm, if you like, in terms of as a provider of homes, and we're building an ambitious programme to build more council homes, and clearly that's going to be part and parcel of that. And there may well be other initiatives which I'm not necessarily going to know all the details about how you go back and deal with that problem, because you're quite right. There's all of those houses, 56,000 of them, they've already got permission, or they were older than when you needed permission for. So, having a local plan which focuses on this is not the be all and end all of addressing that issue. So we'll need to look at, as a council, what other measures we can take, and the government does the same thing with some retrofitting programs of their own funding for things like solar panels in the past and insulation and such like. So this is part of the toolbox, it's part of the package, but it can't resolve every issue. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And we were actually discussing that last night at Health and Environment Policy Committee, and it's really interesting how we have got to change people's habits, but also give them the courage to make those decisions about their own homes if they own their own homes. But the local plan is primarily about land planning, and I think the important part is the way people live we can affect, because we can allocate land to things like cycle paths, to things like solar panel farms, that sort of thing. But we can't actually tell someone that's already got a home exactly what they've got to do to their home, but we certainly can encourage them to do it. And we can make people's lifestyle with recycling, all that sort of thing, so that, and transport, so that they can take part in as lower carbon lifestyle as they possibly can. I think that's probably the end of all the questions. If you feel that you've got a question that you haven't had answered, do let us know in the same way as you recorded that you're interested in coming to this meeting, or go back again to planning policy at winchester.gov.uk. If there are any questions from this meeting that we've missed for some reason, or something comes up in the future, then we'll put it onto an FAQ on the same website, www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. And of course, another feedback link has just come onto the site. This was our first meeting like this. We've got at least another 7. So if you have any feedback on this one, please give it to us. We'll use it as constructive feedback to improve the next ones if we can, and also to make sure that you have the information you need to fill in the local plan consultation satisfactorily. So this consultation, the Strategic Issues and Priorities paper, is the first one, and there will be more opportunities for you to respond back to the draft of the plan and then the final plan. So thank you very much for coming this evening. Sorry, it's only the afternoon, isn't it? This afternoon. And if you'd like to attend a specialised event on carbon neutrality, living well, or the vibrant economy, please contact planning policy at winchester.gov.uk for details. And at those, we'll be talking specifically about those subjects with experts brought in from our own community, so that you can have the opportunity to grill them more specifically on carbon neutrality, living well, or the vibrant economy. Thanks very much indeed for coming. I hope you'll feel now that you're ready to complete the website, the website response. The deadline's the midnight, the 12th of April, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Goodbye. And thank you to our officers too. Thank you, of course.